Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. And great to be here. Really excited about this opportunity and the and supporting UNICEF. This is an awesome event. So, as they mentioned, my name is Dave Patrick, and this is my Build Your First SharePoint Client-Side Web Part with the SharePoint Framework talk. If anyone wants to tweet me, there's my Twitter handle at David E. Patrick. I want to thank C Sharp Corner, the tech platform. In fact, we've got quite a few people or sponsors, companies that made this happen. Let's get the sponsor slide up. Oh, so one thing we want to mention is, please donate. If you have your phone, you can take a picture of the barcode here. I did it earlier. It comes up with a nice little form, and give $1, give $10, give $100, whatever you can give it. And any amount is great. So this event was to support. And next time I looked, they were up above $3,000. So really impressed that people are helping out, and I think it's a great cause. As I mentioned, the sponsors, they made this possible. So Mindcracker, Pack Group, thirdtier.net, Cardiolog Analytics, Soho Dragon, really, C Sharp Corner and the tech platform really wouldn't be able to do without these companies and their support. So thanks to all those guys. There's another couple of barcodes, again, and I think the slides will be up later, but if you missed this now, these are great little evaluations to fill out. Give us some feedback, give us speaker feedback on the left, on the right, event feedback. There's only like 3 questions on that one, so it won't take you all day to do. Just kind of, looking for what worked and what didn't work. Really appreciate you taking time to give us all feedback. So again, my name's Dave Patrick. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, solution developer, solutions expert. I'm starting to forget what the different letters stand for. I've been using SharePoint since it was in beta back in 2001. I take a lot of Microsoft exams. One of my favorite certifications that I've attained by taking all these exams is called MCP Dead. And I honestly think that someone at Microsoft looked at all the exams I was taking and said, you know what? This guy, we need to make fun of him. And so they came up with this, designation. It stands for a Microsoft Certified Professional Developer, Enterprise Application Developer, but the acronym is MCP Dead. So I wear it loud and proud. I work as an IT customer lead / trainer / SharePoint developer / administrator. Actually, I think my official title nowadays is SME, subject matter expert. They got tired of, all the different hats they were giving me. But I work for the U.S. Army. I also work for, my company is DSA, Data Systems Analyst. They are DoD contractors. If you want to reach out to me, there's my email, daviddpatrick@madsharepoint.com. Now, what's Mad SharePoint? Mad SharePoint is one of 3 user groups I run. Let me tell you a little bit about Mad SharePoint. Oh, my quick plug for my company. Been around forever. They do more than just SharePoint. They do security, ID management, network, systems integration. Great company. I've been there for 9 years. I thought I'd be there 6 months when I signed up 9 years ago, but it is really a great small company, less than 500 people, but we have places throughout the United States. We actually have positions in Hawaii, and I keep telling them that send me to Hawaii, so we'll see what happens. It's really a great company to work for. Mad SharePoint. So we're obviously virtual now. We actually went virtual a couple of years ago, not completely virtual. We've been doing hybrid meetings. So up until recently, we were meeting in person, and then we would still using Microsoft Teams have some online attendees. Now we've gone completely virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But check us out, www.madsharepoint.com. We meet monthly. We talk about things like security, no code, low code development, C Sharp, systems, server side development, even though that's kind of passe now. But we talk about it all. So the whole idea of Mad SharePoint came around. Officially, I tell people it stands for Mid-Atlantic Developers, but secretly, if you've worked with SharePoint for any length of time, you know that sometimes you're mad about it and sometimes you're mad at it. It can be, you love it and sometimes maybe not so much. All right. So what do I want you guys to get from today's session? I'm pretty pragmatic, real straightforward. I've got 3 objectives that I want you to take away. One is I want you to know what a web part is. If you've never seen one, I've actually been giving this talk in some shape or form since 2001. And the idea of what a web part is has changed. And we'll talk about some of the technologies that we used to use and what we're asking people to use nowadays. But we want you to know what a web part is. Then we want you to know how you can build one, and then we want you, and that's not enough, right? It's one thing to build it, but how do I get it out there? How do I get it online, on premises? How do I deploy it? Those are the 3 major takeaways. So let's start with a little bit of history of Microsoft SharePoint. It's been around since, as I mentioned, 2001. The code name when it first came out was Tahoe, and sometimes I make that like a trivia question to throw out prizes. It's kind of hard to throw out virtual prizes, but this is the wheel of capabilities from. This is like a 2010 slide, but it's still true today. Six major factors at SharePoint. There's probably a few more in here, but I can build sites with it. I can create community type functionality, sort of Facebook-like functionality. I can do content management, right? I can put up documents, I can have different versions, and people can approve a draft document, things like that. There's search. Back in the day, in 2001, before Google came out, I would install SharePoint in my clients, and all of a sudden they were able to search these, file shares that they weren't very well indexed, and SharePoint was great for that. So SharePoint, and now with SharePoint, 2013, 2016, when they acquired Fast Search back in 2010, their search is just as good as Google if you configure it correctly. What else? Insights, business intelligence. That's what we're talking about. There's a lot of different ways you can leverage SharePoint to provide business intelligence. Power BI, even though that's not technically part of SharePoint, but it works well with SharePoint. And a lot of times I'll store data in SharePoint and use that as a data source for Power BI, not to mention just hosting my charts or even my Power BI reports in SharePoint. The final thing on the wheel there is composites. And what is composites? Composites is a fancy way of saying no code, low code. It's where I can just take, a couple different web parts, put them on a same page, maybe connect them together and get sort of a parent-child relationship application, sort of a one-pager. Oops, let me bring that back up. A lot of functionality. The point is that its main goal, SharePoint's main goal, is connect and empower people, and empower is an important tidbit there. We want users to be able to do things for themselves. So I spend a lot of time talking to users on how they can create web parts very easily, and that's what this talk is geared to do. Not to mention cut costs and rapidly respond to business needs. Now, for a developer, and I know a lot, I'm one of these, and I know a lot of .NET developers that kind of came over to the dark side, that is SharePoint. We were out there, we were doing our C# and we were writing, entity framework and accessing data in SQL Server and doing all that. But the thing with SharePoint, with not using SharePoint when I was a developer and I was creating these line of business applications, is when someone said, hey, Dave, you need to add a new field, it would take me, a month. I'd have to go and I'd have to figure out where this field's going to live. I'd have to create the change code for the SQL Server. I'd have to, make the change in my .NET code. And there was a whole continuous integration. I had to, do QA and testing and all that. When you're working with SharePoint, you can add a field in 5 minutes. You can go to a list and say add another field. So it's a little tricky when you're used to a certain way of doing things, and then you switch to doing development for SharePoint. It can sometimes there's a lot of things to take in consideration. So this kind of highlights some of those things. There were a lot of Microsoft has come out with several sets of developer tools, depending on what version of SharePoint you're targeting to extend or develop for. It has a lot of different ways to do data access. There's different ways to do workflows. They mentioned that there's flexible deployment methods, and we'll talk about some of those. This is both good and bad. So there's a lot of different ways that you can add on to SharePoint, which is good, but it's also kind of overwhelming. A lot of my .NET developers are like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. So there's another slide here that kind of talks about the SharePoint application landscape, kind of helps guide you. What are you trying to do when you're extending SharePoint? What should you build? You can have your own business application that can collaborate and connect to SharePoint. You can use .NET, ASP.NET to extend the interface. You can, it used to be you could do server-side extension, and you still can, even though now that you're not in the cloud, obviously, but if you're on premises, you still can. You just have to think about how that's going to work if you want to move that to the cloud. I have a lot of hybrid customers, though, so we still can do server-side solutions and just know that it's still going to live on premises, and then the things that can live in the cloud can live in the cloud. So different customized SharePoint server workloads are still possible. That said, what technologies do I need to implement some of these extensions or some of these customizations? So when I'm talking to my .NET developers, we go over, REST, APIs, we talk about the client object model, the server object model. We used to use, if we're doing server-side extensions, LINQ, language integrated query, which is like SQL Server for SharePoint, or I'm sorry, it's like SQL for SharePoint. That said, this is, sort of the old school way that you would, you sort of do a deep dive. Nowadays, especially keeping my mind towards the cloud and making extensions that are cloud friendly, I tell my developers to focus on learning HTML5, CSS, JavaScript. What about some, there's many JavaScript libraries out there. jQuery is the main one I want my developers, if they're creating SharePoint extensions, if they're going to build on SharePoint, jQuery makes it so much easier to write JavaScript against SharePoint. And then there's this one out by Mark Anderson, SharePoint Services. It's his JavaScript library that makes calling the web services to connect to SharePoint so much easier. And I know, now that we're going to online and we're going to talk about some of the ways to do that using REST and some other capabilities, but SP services, especially if you're still on premises, is super valuable. So it's definitely something to evaluate and take a look at. Now, if you've been around as long as I have, in 2013, Microsoft said, hey, we don't want you to do server-side extensions anymore. We want you to do apps. We're going to put we know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, those are all good client side. They're not going to bring down the server. Let's bundle it into an app. And I drank the Kool-Aid in 2013. I said, yes, I'm going to do that. There were some issues with apps. You had authentication you had to keep track of. And eventually Microsoft renamed them. Now they're called add-ins. So there was this, okay, they're going to be apps. And by the way, everything in SharePoint seems to be an app. Not only these extensions that were introduced in 2013, but lists are apps, actual apps are apps. It's a little confusing. So they renamed them add-ins, which again sort of added to the confusion. So it does make it difficult for those of us who've kind of suffered through this, and and even some of my new developers, as we kind of explain everything that's going on there. This is the evolution of SharePoint development. As I mentioned, in 2007, we could just, we had IIS information, Microsoft's web server. Your code ran from the global assembly cache in the same process as the web app, which had some potential risks where you could bring everything down. Your code could bring everything down. So in 2010, they introduced the sandbox that kind of had an encapsulation for your code, but that had its own challenges and different features that weren't available anymore. In 2013, they did come up with this idea of an app that, again, separated all your code off the server, made it completely reliable on some client-side technologies, but again, had some additional challenges. Introducing the SharePoint framework. This is the latest and greatest SharePoint development framework, and this one is going to be it, especially for the cloud. This is, if you're going to do SharePoint Online development, this is the framework that you're going to want to use. So what are the pros of the SharePoint framework? Well, it runs as the current user, so you don't have to worry so much about the authentication. Uses the normal document object model. It's responsive and accessible by default. So if you want to make applications that look good on your phone and are 508 compliant, the SharePoint framework is going to help you do that. You have access to all the document object event life cycles, so load and unload and all that stuff. It's not officially tied to a specific framework. So if you want to use React, or if you're familiar with Angular or one of these other JavaScript libraries, you knock out whatever you want. You can use any of those. And the tools that we use to build a web part in the SharePoint framework are common open source tools. Now, I probably should put common in quotation marks, because I was a .NET developer and .NET developer for years, and these tools were all fairly new to me when I first started looking at them. So they're common in the sense that if you're already into the open source, you'll be, oh yeah, I know these. Not so much for me. So tools like NPM, TypeScript, Yeoman, Webpack, and Gulp are common open source tools, but for most of the .NET developers that I work with, it's a bit of a new world. So what are some of the cons? I list some of the pros as cons. So running as a current user, we can't do cool things like impersonating another user. I know that was a thing I like to do in a SharePoint workflow in 2010. Is now I can have the server side impersonate and do things that user normally couldn't do. It uses the normal document object model. Why is that a con? Because that's whatever limitations are there, I'm also subject to those limitations. It's not officially tied to a specific framework. Again, that could be a con, because now I got to figure out which one do I want to learn. It almost would be nice if they said, this is the one, this is what you have to use, and then I could just say, okay, even though I know it's going to have certain limitations, that I know it makes it easier for me to choose. So a lot of the pros can also be viewed as cons. Tools that are common open source, I list this as a con again, because not so common for a lot of folks. If you're like me, you're a Microsoft guy, you grew up a Microsoft guy and didn't do a whole lot with open source, these tools are brand new, or they can be brand new. And it means you got to learn almost all new stuff. So it can be tough. Now, what about our old friend SharePoint Designer? So again, if you've been around a while, SharePoint Designer, you had 2007 version, 2010 version, 2013 version. This was our quote unquote no-code tool for SharePoint and let us do all sorts of cool things. I won't go through all these here, but not so much more for the cloud, right? It's been deprecated. We're not trying. They just announced the other day, Microsoft said that the 2010 workflows, we've got like 3 or 4 months, and then they're going to be turned off online. So Designer is definitely for old school stuff, not for the future. How about Visual Studio 2013? This is the tool, had a web, when it first came out, we had the web part designer. You could, I could graphically design a web part, and you kind of see in that screenshot there what a web part might look like, right? So for those of you who've never seen a web part, it's, it's a little kind of nugget of functionality. In this case, there's a text box, and then there's a calendar, and it looks like add, date. So by combining several controls and putting some code behind it and packaging in that's a web part. And 2013 had a real nice way of packaging that one. It had support for that project type. So that said, now we're looking at SharePoint Framework Online web part development. So a different kind of web part, and we have new tools. And I put this together, or someone put this together, and it gives a great little kind of a side-by-side comparison that says, where you used to use the .NET framework, now you're using Node.js. Where you used to use NuGet, you're now using NPM to install new tools. C#, now we got TypeScript. For those of you who don't know TypeScript emits JavaScript. It's type safe. It's a type safe language that lets us feel like we're working in C#. But then eventually we'll generate JavaScript, which can run anywhere. And then instead of Visual Studio, we have Visual Studio Code. Instead of Microsoft Build, which is built into Visual Studio, you've got Gulp and Webpack. So a whole different set of tools that, as a Microsoft developer, we had to pick up, install, and we're going to go through a lot of these and how to install them. And they're not that bad, trust me. And that's kind of the goal of this talk, is to say, look, even though it's kind of scary because it's a whole new world, it doesn't take that long to get through them and get started with them. So one last thing I'll mention from the old school is, how did we used to develop on SharePoint? It used to be, you could even develop on Windows 7, which actually was never recommended. We tried it and it was horrible. Or Vista. Look at this, is an old slide. So, you don't. The point of this slide is you don't want to develop on your physical machine. I highly recommend using a virtual machine. There's lots of ways you can create virtual machines on your physical machine. I'm a big fan of using the cloud. I have an MSDN subscription, and what I like to do is use Azure. So I can go out to Azure, and there's other cloud providers that you could use too, but my favorite's Azure. And from there, I can go and I can create a virtual machine and install SharePoint. There's even a little wizard. This slide is not as up to date, but there is a SharePoint farm wizard out there. And in just a few clicks, you can click on, you can create in Azure a SharePoint 3-server farm with Active Directory and SQL Server and a web front end, all on the same network with a public IP address. And it doesn't take, Azure, this wizard in Azure makes it so simple to get started with SharePoint development. I literally will go into Azure and I'll create that SharePoint farm, and then I'll, and 15 minutes later, it takes a little time to provision all those things. I'll connect to it, and I'll show you one of mine in a minute. So if you're going to build in SharePoint, now you might be thinking, well, wait, why do I need a SharePoint in Azure? Can I use SharePoint Online? Absolutely. And I actually use those in combination. So I'll have a SharePoint farm and I'll do some of my development on premises, and then I'll deploy it online, and it kind of works really nice together. And I would be remiss if I don't also mention Docker. For those of you who were in the last session, Rob talked all about Docker. There's a great tutorial on how to use Docker for SharePoint framework development. So I've got the link here. If you guys, when you get my slides, you can click on this link and I'll bring it up, and it gives you a little intro to Docker, and it talks specifically how you can use Docker to install all the tools that I'm going to install on my virtual machine. and then access them through Docker. So Docker, if you missed the last session, I'll sum it up. It's like a mini virtual machine that you can access on your physical machine, and so you can put all the tools in there without having to clutter up your physical machine. So it's a nice way to, and then you could even have like multiple different versions. I could have a Docker for SharePoint Framework 1.4, and I have another one for 1.6 or whatever it is I'm doing. All right, so let's talk about building a Hello World work part. And again, this link to this tutorial, I've got it built in my slides. We're going to walk through it, but it's 4-part tutorial that says, hey, how do I get started? How do I set it up? What tools do I need to install? How do I build it? How do I deploy it? So we're going to walk through it. And if you want to walk through it later, this is the link. It's built into the slide. So the first part of it is setting up your environment, right? You got to figure out what machine you're going to use. Are you going to use virtual machine, Docker, physical, whatever? I'm going to go with a virtual machine in Azure. And then once you figure out where your machine's going to live, you got to install the tools. So we're going to need Node.js, Yeoman, Gulp, and then the Yeoman SharePoint generator, which for the .NET developers out there is what's going to be used to generate the code for the sort of the starter code for a SharePoint web framework web part. And one last step is make sure you self-sign. You have to trust the self-signed developer cert, because a lot of our testing uses HTTPS, and we need that self-signed developer cert to make that all work. After that, we're going to go through setting up your Office 365 tenant. You can sign one up. I've got a link for signing up for the Microsoft Office 365 developer program. It's free. I'm a big free guy. Some people call me frugal or cheap, but I think I'm just, efficient. You have to create an app catalog once you have that tenant, and I'll walk through that a little bit. You have to have a SharePoint Online site collection that you're actually going to deploy to for testing. And then we'll talk about one of the tools that's built into the SharePoint framework, which is the SharePoint Workbench, which helps you kind of test out your web part without actually deploying it to an actual site collection. All right, I'll talk about the next steps, and then we'll go back and start the first step. Next, after that, we're going to build our web part, where we create a project, generate the code, give it a name, where we're going to deploy it, choose the project type, make sure everything works. Finally, we connect it to SharePoint, some steps involved in that, and then deploy it. All right, so let me back up here, and let's start with setting up your environment. So let me switch over. So this is the article that walks us through setting up the environment, and it has a nice little video that walks you through. First step, it says, is you've got to install Node.js. And they've got some notes about different versions that you're going to need, and Windows versus Mac. So let's do that. I'm on. By the way, I kind of jumped ahead. I'm on my virtual machine, so let me show you what I'm talking about. If I hover up here, notice this little bar here and this address here. This is telling me that I'm on a virtual machine that's located at 23.102.133.40. So if I minimize this for a second, this is my actual desktop. And what I did is I came over here to Azure, so Azure, portal.azure.com, and I logged in as me. And then I looked at different virtual machines I had. I clicked on virtual machines, and I went to this one, which is the one I'm using today, SP. And you can have multiple ones. And then if you've never used Azure before, I started it, because it's kind of like Uber. Once your machine starts, it starts charging you money. I am using an MSDN subscription. So a lot of companies, by the way, have those. Every company I worked for 8 or 9 companies, and every single one I've said, hey, do you have a software agreement? Do you have any MSDN subscriptions? Are you in a partnership with Microsoft? And I think, I want to say 10 times out of 10, they've had it. So if you need free credit, investigate with your company. If not, you can sign up for a trial. They give you $200 for 30 days to play with this. But when you start your virtual machine, that's when your credit starts running. So if I click down here on my subscription, you'll see how much money I've been using. This one's been running all day, so it's probably used a couple of bucks of my credit. The nice thing about an MSDN subscription is that if I use all my credit, then it shuts down all the machine. So it's great for development and test. I wouldn't use this for production. For production, I'd want to use a real subscription, and so everything runs all the time. There is a way you can remove the credit limit, but then it would actually charge a credit card. I don't want that. So this is my virtual machine. I literally connect on this, and there's a couple different ways I can connect. I use remote desktop, It lets me download the RDP file. It comes up and says, hey, how do you want to log in? I tell it I want, give it a username and password, and then eventually it will connect. And I won't do this because I'm already connected, but then it connects to my virtual machine. The other note about that, before I give up on it, is that, again, you can create these virtual machines. You can go and just, click on virtual machine and create a new virtual machine. And it's a little widget that walks you through, hey, add, and then you can specify the type of virtual machine you want to create, maybe a Windows Server machine, where, excuse me, where you want to create it, all that stuff. But what I really love about Azure is that it has that wizard I mentioned. So if I go here and click create a resource and I type in SharePoint, there is a wizard for creating a SharePoint farm 2013 non-high availability. Why non-high availability? This is for dev test. I don't want redundancy. That's just going to use my credits faster. This would be a lean, mean SharePoint farm just for dev and test. And I'll start and stop the machines as necessary. So I use this non-H. Weird. I don't know how I got muted. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please.
Very good. So as I was saying, Visual Studio Code is a great editor. Lightweight, free, runs on Windows, runs on Mac. In this example, I've opened up one of the Hello World examples that we're going to download and play with. You can see the color codings built in. It's got the great IntelliSense. So really anything, I use it for HTML editing, CSS editing, JavaScript editing, Python. I use it for other languages. Great little tool. So it's hard for me to not recommend Visual Studio Code. So what else did we have? So we did the Node, did the Visual Studio Code. The next thing I think we need to install, where'd it go? I lost my tutorial. That's okay. Bring it back up. The other tools, right? So we had, what else did we have? Here, let's bring it up from our slides. So we did Node, we did Visual Studio Code. I'm jumping ahead there. There we go. Let's go back to setting it up. Now we need the other tools, right? You can install all three of these tools, right? Gulp, the generator. And what I love about this article that walks us through it is I can just copy. I don't even have to try to type that myself. So I click copy. I jump now. Again, I teach at a lot of universities, and a lot of my students are younger, 18, 20 years old. I have to be careful. I'll say, so just drop to a DOS prompt, and they'll go, whoa, DOS prompt? What's a DOS prompt, old man? I'll go, oh, I'm sorry. A command prompt, right? So we'll jump down here to a command prompt, type CMD for command, and bring up the command prompt. And again, I'm used to old school DOS. I call this a DOS prompt, but it's command prompt. So when we develop tools in the Visual Studio Web Framework, we're using the command prompt to do a lot of not only our installation, but a lot of running the tools. So now that we're at this command prompt, we'll come in here, we'll clear the screen, and now we're going to, let me actually bring this over here so I can see both of my tools. I'll put it back there. There we go. So we'll go ahead and paste this guy in here. And enter. Then that's going to go ahead and install all those other tools for me, everything else I need. Now this will take a few minutes. So I've already done it already, so I don't need to actually watch it run. But it's not long. I want to say like 5-10 minutes. So we'll let that kind of bake. If I was Martha Stewart, we'll say, you know, let that bake in the background, and we'll come back to it in a minute. So we did the code editor. We've got Gulp installed, Yeoman. They also walk you through doing each one at a time. So whatever, you know, floats your boat. The generator. Modern browser, I mean, you know, if you did a new virtual machine, it's probably going to have Edge on it. You know, Chrome works, Firefox, just don't use IE. That's older, so use a modern browser. And then the final step is to trust your self-signed developer certificate. So it's just running this command here, and again, you can just copy it. So again, out to the command prompt and see if it's done. I doubt it. I'll open up another command prompt so I can show you this command. The other one's still running, so let's jump out to this new one. We can get to the new one. Paste that command in there, and that just, oh, what happened there? It's you know, it's reinstalling, so that's what I get for trying to run this while the other one's reinstalling. So we'll wait. We'll be patient, let that one finish. There we go. Looks like it's almost done. Is it done? There we go. Now that that guy's done, let's see if we can run the last command. Go back and grab it. Here. Paste it in there. It doesn't want to paste. Okay, one more time. It's like my control V is not working. Okay, one more time here. All right, try to paste it. There we go. Third time's a charm. So looks like, did I uninstall my Gulp? Maybe. That's okay. We'll just reinstall it. I think I did that 3-in-1 installation. I'm not sure what happened there. I might have uninstalled something I didn't mean to uninstall, but it's nice that it tells me, hey, maybe you just need to put it back in there. So that's exactly what I'll do. So we'll give that a second to reinstall Gulp, and then we'll do our cert certificate. So while that's doing that, we'll pop back over to the, oh, okay. I thought that might take longer, but it didn't. Now let's see if we can do that Gulp. All righty. I use my up arrow to bring up my, no, it's still not, okay. Well, you know, oh, you know what, I'm silly. I'm not in my code directory. So let me go into one of my examples. So I'm jumping ahead, but now when I want to actually create a project, I want to go store it in a directory, right? So what do I've got? A demo directory. I've got a web part 1 that I did earlier. So let's go into demo. So change directory demo, see what I've got in there. So again, for those of you who are new to the command prompt, there's some certain commands, dir for listing the directory, cd for changing directory. So I'll change directory to the hello world web part, and you can even do things like put a little asterisk so I can save myself some typing. And now I should be able to do that, up arrow, and get to that Gulp trust, the cert. Woo! That's what I get for closing a window. Now it's trusted. It's generated that certificate that's going to make the HTTPS work. All righty. So now we fought through that. Let's get back to our slides. So we've got our virtual machine. We've installed all of our tools. We've trusted the self-signed developer cert. Now we have to sign up for Office 365, create that app catalog, create the online site, and test out the SharePoint workbench. So let's do that. Come back out here. Now, Office 365 is great. And if you haven't signed up for it to get your free 5-user tenant, please do. Office 365 developer program. I'm just going to Bing it. And it should come up. And I think they renamed it to the M365 developer program. Indeed, they did. So I click on that, and this is like a little known secret. So many people I show this to, .NET developers, SharePoint developers, are like, what? I didn't know I could get my hands on my own Office 365 tenant, 5 users for free. Yes, you can. Now it's for development of code, but that's what we want. So you join. There's no credit card. I love it for my students. It'll be going for, I think, 90 days. And so this one that I'm already logged into is, I've got 69 days left. But actually they bumped it. Looks like they bumped it up to 25 users. It used to be 5 users. E5 subscription. What's great about this is that it renews. As long as I'm using it, it automatically renews. So I've had this one for years. I've created this. Created some. I've got like 4 or 5 that I use for different things. I work with a nonprofit called Tech Girls, and we've got one for those. And as long as we're using it to do development, it will automatically renew. And I get an email every now and then saying, "Hey, congratulations, you'll be renewed." I'm like, great. So by all means, check that out. Set up your, and great if you're doing SharePoint web part development. What this gives me, once I'm signed up, I can come in here to Office, log in with my account that this creates for me, and then go to SharePoint. So here's my little SharePoint tenant, and I've got all sorts of sites there. This is sort of the main, SharePoint app, and shows me different sites I have and different things I've been working on. What's really cool, I'll go to my other window for a second, is just like I said, when you create when you create a SharePoint farm in Azure, you're the farm admin. When you sign up for this developer tenant, you are the Office 365 global administrator. So I can go in here and I can do things like manage all my SharePoint sites. I can come in here. This is Office 365. I actually use this tenant to help me prep for the Office 365 administrator exam. I could do all sorts of different tasks in here. I could create new sites. I could change storage. I could make sites have guest access. What we do in this particular tutorial is we need to create that app catalog. So that's what I've done here. Is I created a new SharePoint site and made it my app catalog. I clicked on the little new. Looks like I've reached the maximum resource limit. I've done this so many times, but if I wasn't at the maximum resource limit, I would be able to click on new. In this case, I created an app catalog. And then once you create that site collection and designate it as an app catalog, I'll show you what it looks like. So there's my app catalog. From there, you can upload apps, and that's what we're going to need later when we deploy this thing. We're going to go and we're going to generate a file that is deployable, and then literally we can click upload into our app catalog, and that's how we deploy it to Office 365. So that's why we need Office 365 developer tenant. What else do we need? Let me show you the SharePoint Workbench real quick. So jump back out here. So the SharePoint, there's actually 2 flavors of the SharePoint Workbench. There's an Office 365 hosted Workbench, and then there's the local Workbench. So when I come over here to my Office 365 tenant, I can come over here. There's a special URL. That's the local one. You can tell by the word localhost. But if I go over here to the other window, this is my tenant in Office 365 is called madsharepoint.sharepoint.com layouts _layouts 15 workbench. This is my 365 workbench. Now there's nothing going on right here. It should actually even warn me. It'll say, hey, if you're not serving up a web part, that's what it's telling me. Hey, you're not running gulp serve. You're not running. You haven't developed a web part. You're not hosting it yet. Then I can't add it here, right? So this is how I would add a web part. I'd click up here, and you've got all these built-in web parts that you can add, but you're not going to see my Hello World web part yet because I haven't written it. I haven't hosted it. I've got to run gulp serve. We're going to get to that in a second. But this is the one workbench that we could use to see that. And then there's also a local workbench, which is right here, that right now you're not going to see until I actually walk through creating the website and serve it up. So let's do that. So let's build our web part. How do we do it? We create a new project directory from our command prompt, cd to the make a directory using the md command, cd directory using change directory to this using the cd command. We'll generate a new web part project, give it a name, where we're going to deploy it, choose the project type, and then we'll take a look at it. So back out here to our tutorial that walks us through all those steps. And say, yep, we've set up our environment, we're ready to go. Now we want to build it. And again, there's a nice little video, but this is it. You're going to make the directory, give it a name, change to that directory, and then this is I've already done these two parts. This is the part that's interesting, is you're just going to say, go create the starter code for a SharePoint web part. And the command is yo@Microsoft/SharePoint. So let's do that again. We'll jump out here to my command line. And so you can see I did it earlier under this demo directory. I'll make another one. We'll call this, we'll just call it HW. And then we'll cd to HW. And then we're going to do that yo@Microsoft/SharePoint. That's the same as if I was in Visual Studio and I said file new, project, and I selected, Visual Studio web part. And if I was doing, the 2013. So now it's going to come up and it's giving me, some of those prompts. What do you want to call it? I'll accept the default HW. Who am I targeting? Am I targeting SharePoint Online? Am I targeting SharePoint 2016, 19, and Online? Or am I just targeting 29 onwards? So the idea on using the arrows to move back and forth here is that if I go for Online, I'm going to have, I'm going to be able to use all the latest and greatest features of Online. If I go for 2019, I won't be able to use any features that are online only. And if I use 2016, I'm going to have even less features available to me, but I'll be compatible, I'll be able to deploy on 2016 on premises. So it's a trade-off, depending on who your audience is, where you want this web part to be deployed to, and what features you want to take advantage of, that's going to drive your decision on which target you choose. So we'll go with SharePoint Online, latest and greatest. Where do I want? Well, I'm already in the right folder, so we'll say current folder. And now it says, hey, do you want to be able to allow the tenant admin to deploy this solution immediately without running any feature deployment? The default's no. That means they'll have to do it themselves. If you say yes, then they have that capability. I'm going to go ahead and just accept the default. The next thing says, hey, will the components in the solution require permissions to access web APIs? If that's something you're doing, that are unique and not shared with others, then you want to say yes. But again, we're going to keep it simple. So I'll say no. Down here, we're talking about web parts, but you could also use this to generate code for an extension or a library, your own custom library. We're going to stick with web part. What's my web part name? I'll accept the default hello world. Give it a description. Again, I'm just keeping it short and sweet. Here's where you can actually generate code using this generator for different frameworks. It knows about React, it knows about Knockout. If I want to use Angular, I could say no JavaScript framework and then just add it in manually. So there's steps out there on how to do that manually. And if you've got some other JavaScript framework and you want to choose that, you can do that as well. Again, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to say no JavaScript framework. So now it's out there and you can see the different files that just like in Visual Studio, when I said file new project and selected a project type, it's just generating all that code for me. And again, it takes about a minute or two to generate the code. So while it's doing that, I'll see if I can do a Martha Stewart and pull up another window. See if it works for me this time. And I'll change to the one I was just looking at. One that was done already. And I'm going to gulp serve that, which should run the local run the local web server and make it available to the workbench, both workbenches, both the online workbench and the local workbench. So you'll notice that my local workbench automatically refreshed. There's the local workbench. How do I know it's local? Because if you look up here, you'll see it says local host for and then what port it's running on. And now, what is this workbench again? It's not really SharePoint. It looks like SharePoint, but it's not, right? It's just a framework that emulates and simulates SharePoint, and I can use it to test out my web part. So I can click on here, the plus sign, and notice because this is the local workbench, I don't get all those cool built-in web parts that we saw from online. I just get a text box. But I also get this one, Hello World. That's the one we just created. That's the one that I can test out and is available. So now I can go ahead and I can add it there. And we didn't change any of the code in online. There's a whole nother tutorial that walks through actually, changing this and putting your own data and connecting to lists and all that. But that's my custom SharePoint Hello World web part. If I wanted to have another one, I could go ahead and add it again. You can even play around with the sections if you wanted to, change it to, say 3 columns and then put one here. So the workbench allows you to really get a good look and feel of how your web part would interact with actual SharePoint. And again, right now Gulp Serve is running. So here's Gulp Serve running, so it's available. If I go to my online workbench and notice this, I haven't refreshed this yet, so I don't see Hello World. But if I refresh this, I should see Hello World as option to add to the online workbench, and let's see if that's the case. Oh, there it was. I skipped right over. There it is. So there's Hello World. So again, either workbench, I can, as long as I'm running Gulp Serve, I can upload my newly developed web part and deploy to those workbenches. All right. Now, the next section talks about, defining the list model, retrieving lists using mocks, adding styles. I'm not going to go through all that. I will point out the article so that if you want to try yourselves, I think it's a great exercise. But it does walk you through some, adding some additional capability versus just running the sample. So let me show you what that is. So once you get to the end of all this article, then it actually starts walking you through, okay, you know what, you want to give it a better name, you maybe want to add some additional properties, you want to really make it your own web part. So there's a lot of great, it walks you through doing all that and making it truly your own web part. The last thing I want to do, as we're running out of time here, is show you how to actually connect it and upload it to SharePoint. And that's what this next section talks about, is how do this section talks again about using connecting the lists and using mocks to, again, further customize your web part. But what I want to, I'm going to leave that for you guys to play with. What I want to show you, and this is kind of, there's, you can see some of the list items that it retrieved, but I want to show you how to actually get it out there. So how do you get it out there? What you need, what's important, is the file that your web part will be packaged in. So there's a command to package that. Then you can take that file and you can upload it to the app catalog. That's the deployment step. You do have to install the client-side solution on your site. So whatever site you have on, you have to say, hey, I want to add that app to my site. Then you can put it, then you actually take that web part and you put it on a page. So let's look at that. So back out to the article for just a second to grab that last deployment command. And this is what we need, Gulp package solution. What that's going to do is that's going to generate this SPPKG file, which is a package file. So if we go out here to my Gulp Serve, I'm going to stop the Gulp server, Control C, break that, and now I'm going to run that last command to package that up. And what we should see is that it's going to generate a, there it is, create it, assuming I didn't have any errors, it's got that hello world-web part SPPKG file. That's what we need to upload. So now we can go to our actual SharePoint, so not the workbench, but let's go to one of the pages here. So here's one of my sites in my SharePoint Online, University of Maryland. And I can come in here and I can say, hey, oh, I got to put it in the app catalog, right? So before I can add it onto a page, I'm skipping a step. I'm going to go back up to my app catalog. You can see I've done this already. I did one earlier that was a modern script editor. This is the one I did the other day for Hello World. So again, I just click upload. So in my app catalog, I click upload. I browse to that SPPKG file. Looks like that's the one. That's an older one. Where's the one I just worked on? Demo there. This is the one we worked on today. I think I did the other one. Yeah, this one. Did we do that, or did we do the HW one? So it's going to be. Go back and grab that one. Try that one more time. I lost where I was. There, let's just grab this one. So I grab that file, which is located in this example in that solution directory. I say, okay, it's going to update the file, assuming that, yep, updated good. I can refresh and I'll see it. And then in my site, I can go and grab a page. Now this works for classic pages and modern pages. So I've got both classic and moderns here. Let's take a look at this one. I believe this one is a classic page. No, this is the modern page, right? So you can tell by the hero web part and all that. It looks, this is the modern, and you can see I edited the site or the page, and I said let's go ahead and add a new web part. Can add a section. Click here to add the web part. Find my Hello World web part. There it is. So obviously it works for modern pages, but what I thought was neat when I first started investigating this is it also works for classic pages. So I'm in my little site pages folder of this particular site. And if I go to one of the older pages, this is a wiki page. This is a classic page. I can do the same thing. I can come in here, I can edit the page. So this is for those of you who do classic stuff. It's got the old ribbon, and it's in a category called Other. There's my Hello World. There's my New World SharePoint web part on a classic page, which I thought was really, really cool. There it is. So as I mentioned, the key to this, that SPPKG file, is the deployment artifact. If you're interested, it is secretly a zip file. You can actually copy and rename it. If I go out here and look at my my folder, I made a copy of it, and you can rename it to a .zip file. You can double click on it then, and you can just see what's inside there. It's got the client-side assets, the JavaScript, CSS, any your HTML, the app manifest, a bunch of XML files, but it gets deployed as an app in the app, or I should say as an add-in in the app catalog. So that's it. A lot of great resources out there. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of URLs built into my slides. One resource I love, by the way, this one's been around forever, is mssharepointdeveloper.com. If you go to that, that's kind of a great starting point. If you're just new to SharePoint, you've got some development, and it will kind of walk you through, what I did, some of the history, but where we are now and where to get started. Some other sites, developer.microsoft.com, SharePoint patterns and practices. So lots of great resources out there. I recommend starting with that first one. That one kind of leads to all the other ones, though. Thanks, everyone. Is there any questions out there for me? I think we got a couple of minutes left for maybe a question or two.
Hi, Dave. We don't see any questions in the Q&A forum.
Awesome. Great. That means everyone understood everything completely and perfectly. I really appreciate it. Again, if you think of questions later, I know sometimes it's a lot, and your mind's spinning, and then later you think of a question. There's my Twitter handle, @DavidEPatrick. I'd love for people to tweet me questions later and say, hey, Dave, where was that link again? Or what did you say you needed to do? Gulp serve wasn't working for me. I had a question the other day. Someone typed in gulp serve, and they did it all in caps. And it's like, nope, it's case sensitive. So watch out for that. Lots of little gotchas here and there. But feel free to hit me up later if you have any questions. Again, my Twitter handle is @DavidEPatrick. If you're looking for a job, there's my company's list of jobs. If you want to join my user group, madsharepoint.com. We meet monthly. We're virtual now, so we welcome people from all over the world to talk about SharePoint, both the good stuff and maybe some not so good stuff. All right, thanks guys. I appreciate it. Hope you learned something. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Dave.